I still think there's potential for any conversation on Palestine to be uncomfortable. We saw how Donald Trump, he said about Emmanuel Macron when he talked about statehood, he seems like he's a great guy, but luckily on this, it doesn't really matter what he says, was effectively his point. It's in Emmanuel Macron is irrelevant on this issue. Would he take a similar view with the UK Prime Minister?
Now, Keir Starmer, John Swinney and Ursula von der Leyen are all gearing up to meet with Donald Trump as the US president makes a bit of time in his busy golfing schedule for trade talks. And every Sunday at this time, we'll be joined by one of the Times' brilliant journalists based stateside for a roundup of political news in Washington, D.C. Today, I'm delighted to say that the Times' Washington editor, Katy Balls, joins me. Good afternoon, Katy.
Good afternoon.
Now, I understand you've actually popped over from DC to be here on the ground while Donald Trump is here because, well, you have to follow him at close range all the time as Washington editor, right?
Yeah, today's DC update does come from Scotland, but I'm bringing both perspectives. They only recently arrived.
Exactly. Katy, now, Keir Starmer is reportedly going to urge Trump to resume Gaza ceasefire negotiations when they do meet tomorrow. Donald Trump has so far been backing Israel while UK MPs and increasingly the public as well want Keir Starmer to recognise the Palestinian state. So I guess in some ways this could be quite a difficult diplomatic tightrope for the Prime Minister, but also given that they have quite a good relationship, perhaps he is the person to persuade Trump on this. What do you think?
Potentially. I mean, I think this is an area where the West, in terms of the European leaders, can obviously make their case. And you saw that with Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron on Ukraine previously, both having visits to the Oval Office within days of one another where they made the pitch. And it can be almost, you build it up. Does one person get through? It does feel as though, despite the fact that the UK government, a Labour government, holds many positions which are quite different to the Trump administration, and many positions that the Trump administration have openly spoken about, such as freedom of speech. If you think about JD Vance. Yet Trump and Starmer himself have a fairly cordial, friendly relationship that surprises some around them. It is, you are told by figures, and of course, perhaps they would say this, but the evidence is there too, that it is a genuinely warm relationship. I still think there's potential for any conversation on Palestine to be uncomfortable. We saw how Donald Trump, he said about Emmanuel Macron when he talked about statehood, he seems like, he's a great guy, but luckily on this, it doesn't really matter what he says, was effectively his point. It's in Emmanuel Macron is irrelevant on this issue. Would he take a similar view with the UK Prime Minister?
Interesting. Katy, I mean, Gaza, I suppose, is top of the public's mind with this meeting, but possibly not top of Keir Starmer, well, Donald Trump's minds. What else do we expect the two leaders to discuss?
I think the top item for Keir Starmer, although he clearly wants to bring up the issue of Palestine and Gaza, is trade. I mean, this meeting has been organised around the idea of the UK-US trade deal, the first trade deal, but the fact it's not fully been actioned yet. When it comes to the steel tariffs, there's some nerves in number 10. They really want to make sure some of that relief, you could call it, but the fact they're on a less bad rate than other countries, they want to bring in some of this now. So I think where are we at with the UK-US trade deal will be a key point. And can the US side have said they're not planning to open it up for further negotiations, but of course Keir Starmer, who will be, of course, in Scotland, and we're hearing wants to talk about whiskey and whiskey tariffs. So you can imagine a general push on tariffs and trade, both within the deal and outside it, to try and make sure the UK is in the best position. As for the US side, I think that there's lots of things that the US side probably question about the UK at the moment. As I mentioned in the Sunday Times this week, the economic relationship that the UK is seeking with China and so forth. There's lots of things adding up. We had Donald Trump begin his visit by saying that immigration is too high in Europe, saying, it's killing you guys. Could that come up? I think generally speaking, these meetings, at least when it involves Keir Starmer, tend to go better than we expect. And when they involve other figures in the Oval Office, they can go wrong. So the trend is in Keir Starmer's favour. Let's see if he can keep it up.
Katy, last summer was officially Brat summer, and this year, according to your piece in today's Sunday Times, it's a MAGA British summer. It seems like half of DC are heading over here, including JD Vance, who is often he's quite scathing about the UK publicly. I've got to ask if he does. I mean, if he thinks so little of us, why is he so keen to spend his summer over here?
Yeah, well, I mean, first off, I think I had a Republican say to me in DC before I traveled over saying, oh, it's a MAGA British summer. So we'll have to see if that catches on in Britain like Hot Girl Summer did. As for JD Vance himself, in my column this week in the Sunday Times, I do look into this, which is if you think about, you know, recent inhabitants of the White House, so Barack Obama and Joe Biden, both visited Ireland, saying it was their ancestral home. We have probably the administration that has taken the closest interest in the UK in decades. They're quite Anglophile. Obviously, we also need to fit Scotland within that. And Donald Trump has a deep affection for Scotland. His mother, of course, was from the Hebrides. And JD Vance, we're told, cares a lot about the UK. Now, I spoke to some figures who were close to him, both on and off the record, and they said, no, he criticizes the UK because he cares, and there's an ancestral longing. There is a sense that if the UK is not okay, then perhaps the US won't be okay in the long term. Obviously, some have said if we go way back to well, you go to Greece to Rome, but I think it's a slightly different way of seeing it. But certainly, I think they will tell you that their criticism when it comes to beliefs on freedom of speech, what they think the wrong turns the UK has taken, that it really comes from a place of love.
Right, right. It's sort of a little bit like your parents when you're a truculent teenager. Then they're just saying
Yeah.
it because they love you and they care. Got it,
Or
right.
the intervention from concerned friends when they think you've taken a wrong turn, perhaps.
Now, Katy, you also had a great interview with David Hogg earlier in this week's Times. Who is he and how is he influencing US politics right now?
So David Hogg's a really interesting character on the other side of politics, so the Democrats, because David Hogg has been an activist for a long time. He was a survivor of the Parkland school shooting and got involved with gun restriction advocacy. But now he has a mission to try and shake up the Democratic Party. So the old guard, these figures who've been around for a very long time, he wants to see younger challengers. And he has a group, Leaders We Deserve, which was I think, the largest funder to the Mandani campaign. So that was the insurgent campaign for New York mayor, which saw the Democratic primary won by an outsider, a young guy who used social media videos and really shook the Democrat establishment. And he's now looking at, if we're looking all the way to 2028, including midterms and others, how can you get a lot younger candidates? He said it was a bit like the Soviet Union, but not completely like the Soviet Union, to be clear, when everyone starts dropping off and then a new thing begins.
And Hogg's only 25 himself, isn't he? And he's sort of funding and supporting lots of Gen Z candidates. I mean, people do ask quite frequently, where are the young Democrats that are coming through? I mean, do you think he really could be part of a new guard?
I think there's potential for it. You saw with the Mamdani campaign how a candidate, if they are the right candidate in terms of they're a candidate who suits a social media campaign, when they say things people care, that they're charismatic, they're authentic, that can catch on. He's backed two other candidates, one recently in the Arizona primary, and she came second. This was Deja Fox, who was very young. She would have been the first Gen Z congresswoman had she got it and then been elected. And she made inroads, but not all the way. So I do think with this campaign vehicle and the Democratic Party being at a place right now where there's a big debate about the direction they could take, this is going to be one of the really interesting stories, because David Hogg is quite happy to try and primary some old guard members, which really upsets the establishment, who feel that they should be focusing on taking the fight to the Republicans. He would argue you need to change party to actually take the other side on.
Interesting. Katy, it feels like just yesterday that our very own John Pienaar was over stateside for Trump's 100 days. Suddenly, somehow, it's 200 days tomorrow. That's snuck up on us, hasn't it?
Yes, and I think I remember sat with John Pienaar, and I think I was maybe just under 1 week into my new job
Oh.
as the Washington editor at the Times and Sunday Times. So it's gone quite quickly for me too, I would say.
Well, we haven't given you
Um,
a day off since, Katy. That's why.
Yeah, we'll talk about that one. But yeah, no, it's been, I mean, I remember my first column I did for the Sunday Times, since taking on this role was here's what to expect in the next one, why the next 100 days will be the most important. And we could probably just keep saying that for each 100 days. But the point that Steve Bannon made to me, he was really senior in the White House in the first time for Trump and still is important in the movement, was, you had these big fights coming up on in the courts on things like immigration, on where the court would be able to stop it. And then also he said you had Donald Trump trying to stop World War III. And both those points proved pretty prescient if we think about the court cases, which actually have more gone in Donald Trump's favor. I think if we look at just some of those things like birthright citizenship, some of those things about deportation, his agenda has not been blocked completely in the way that some were worried about. And then secondly, of course, what we saw with Iran, there's still a long way to go in Ukraine and others, but their intervention on Iran was something which I think has really defined those 100 days in Washington, D.C. and beyond.
Yeah, but I think you're right in that every 100 days is going to be a busy one for the next 3.5 years.
Yeah, I'll just keep repeating the column.
Exactly. Yeah. In the slightly shorter term, Katy, what else should we be looking forward to in DC and beyond this week?
Well, we're now at the point where ultimately, Congress is effectively the summer holiday. So you have Trump in Scotland obviously heading to Aberdeen. Congress is not sitting. You had congressmen sent home. There was some talk of an Epstein vote. It didn't come to pass. The House was not there to do it. So I think we're now in a world where we're heading to the long, extremely hot August in DC, where most politicians get completely out of town and escape. And if you tell someone in DC you're going to be there in August, they give you quite a pitying look.
I've spent several Augusts in DC. I quite enjoy it. The storms are amazing, but it is definitely sweaty. So maybe next time we check in, Katy, we can just do a temperature gauge. You can
Yeah,
just tell me
fine.
how hot it is. But in the meantime, Katy, enjoy the slightly cooler climes of Scotland for the next few days. Thank you so much for speaking to us this afternoon. That is the hardest working woman in Washington, our Washington editor, Katy Balls.